Hi. Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm Charlotte. This is Quarantine Story Time, where we're picking up reading of War and Peace. Well, we promote, and also we are promoting Black Lives Matter movement and racial justice in America. Today, I am reading at a slightly different time than I normally do, but I promised everyone that this video would be up so that you could watch it anytime today. Because I actually, with some scheduled reopening and things, I'm actually going back to work. But we're not quite through War and Peace yet, and so I am committed to finishing it with you guys. And by not quite through, I mean we're still not even quite halfway. So I guess we needed a little bit longer. So we're going to pick up on War and Peace. It's a little bit of a shorter reading today, so that we will finish Volume 2. We're going to finish Part 4 of Volume 2. And then I promise you guys the reading will be a little bit longer when I do it for tomorrow. So there's that. But yes, so without too much further ado, we're going to jump right in and read this. And like I said, though, this video will be up on the playlist, the War and Peace playlist that I have, and it will also be, I'll try to make it the highlighted video on my channel so that if you're tuning in later today, you can still listen to it or watch it fairly easily, find it fairly easily. So let's go ahead and jump back in. As you may recall, if you were here yesterday, we're focusing on the Rostov family right now, and the young people have all piled in sleighs and are rushing over, dressed up in costumes. It's Christmas time. They've rushed in sleighs across the snow to this neighbor family with a widow and some children in costumes to entertain and bring merriment to them. And Sonia is beginning to think that this might be the time when she'll find out Nikolai Rostov might propose to her, or things will be decided one way or another, because he's been getting closer to her, even though the family would prefer him to marry someone who has a fortune, because their financial situation isn't great, basically because they don't know how to handle money. So, story of our lives, days of our lives. So again, let's jump back into section 11. Pelageya Danilovna Melyukov, a broad, energetic woman in spectacles and an open housecoat, was sitting in the drawing room, surrounded by her daughters, whom she was trying to keep from being bored. They were quietly pouring wax and looking at the shadows of the figures that emerged, when footsteps and the voices of the visitors were heard in the front hall. Hussars, ladies, witches, clowns, bears, clearing their throats and wiping their frost-covered faces in the front hall, came into the reception room, where candles were hastily lighted. The clown Dimmler and the lady Nikolai opened the dance. Surrounded by shouting children, the mummers, covering their faces and alternating their voices, bowed before the hostess and took their places in the room. Ah, it's impossible to recognize them. And Natasha, see what she looks like. She really looks like somebody. And Edward Karlik is something. I didn't recognize him. How well he dances. Ah, dear me, there's a Circassian here too. It really suits you, Sonyushka. And who's this one? Well, how amusing. Nikita, Vanya, take the tables away. And we were sitting here so quietly. Ha ha ha. That hussar, just like a boy, and the legs. I can't stand it, the voices said. Natasha, the young Melyukov's favorite, disappeared with them into the back room, asking to be brought cork and various house robes and men's clothing, which the girl's bare arms received from a footman through a slightly open door. In 10 minutes, all the young people of the Melyukov family had joined the mummers. Pelageya Danilovna, having ordered a space cleared for the guests and snacks served to the master and servants, not removing her spectacles with a suppressed smile, walked among the mummers, looking closely at their faces and not recognizing anybody. She not only did not recognize the Rostovs or Dimmler, she could not recognize her own daughters or her husband's robes or uniforms which they were wearing. And who's this one? She said, addressing her governess and looking into the face of her daughter, who was addressed as a Kazan Tartar. Seems to be one of the Rostovs. Well, and you, Mr. Hussar, which regiment do you serve in? She asked Natasha. That Turk? Give that Turk some fruit jelly, she said to the butler with a tray. Their law doesn't prohibit it. Sometimes, looking at the strange but funny steps the dancers made, having decided once and for all, as they were dressed up, no one could recognize them, and therefore not feeling embarrassed, Pelageya Danilovna covered her face with her handkerchief, and her whole corpulent body shook with unrestrained, kindly old woman laughter. "Sassenette! Look at my sassenette," she said. After Russian dances and singing, Pelageya Danilovna joined all the servants and masters together in one big circle. They were brought a ring, a piece of string, and a 1 ruble coin, and played games together. An hour later, all the costumes were crumpled and disordered. The burnt cork mustaches and eyebrows were smeared over sweaty, flushed, and merry faces. Pelageya Danilovna began to recognize the mummers, admired how well the costumes had been made, how they especially suited the young ladies, and thanked them all for the entertaining her so well. The guests were invited for supper in the drawing room, and food was arranged for the servants in the reception room. "No fortune telling in the bathhouse, that's the scary thing," an old maid who lived with the Melyukovs said over supper. "Why so?" asked the eldest Melyukov daughter. "You wouldn't go. It takes courage." "I'd go," said Sonia. "Tell us what happened with that young lady," the Salkid Melyukov girl said. "Here's what," said the old maid. "A girl once went, took a cock, set the table for two, all very proper, and sat down. She sat for a while, only suddenly she hears harness bells, sleighs ringing, a sleigh drives up. She hears him coming. He walks in, looking just like a man, like an officer, goes over and sits down at her table." "Ah, ah," Natasha cried, rolling her eyes back in terror. "But how was he? Could he speak?" "Yes, like a man, everything as it should be. And so he started. He started persuading her, and she should have kept him busy talking till cockcrow, but she got timid and covered her face with her hands. So he got up and grabbed her. It's a good thing the maids came running in right then." "Now why go scaring them?" Pelageya Danilovna said. "Mother, you did fortune-telling yourself," said the daughter. How do you tell fortunes in a barn?" asked Sonia. "You could do it even now. You go to the barn and listen. If you hear banging or knocking, it's bad. If you hear grain pouring, it's good. But it also happens. Mama, tell us what happened to you in the barn." Pelageya Danilovna smiled. "Why, I've forgotten by now," she said. "None of you would go, would you?" "No, I'll go. Let me, Pelageya Danilovna. I'll go," said Sonia. "All right, go if you're not afraid." "May I, Louisa Ivanovna?" asked Sonia. Whether playing with the ring, the string, or the ruble coin, or talking as they were now, Nikolai never left Sonia's side and looked at her with totally new eyes. It seemed to him that it was only today, for the first time, owing to the cork mustache, that he had known her fully. Indeed, that evening Sonia was merrier, livelier, and prettier than Nikolai had ever seen her before. "So this is how she is, and I'm a fool," he thought, looking at her shining eyes and happy, rapturous smile, such as he had never seen before, which made dimples on her cheeks under the mustache. "I'm not afraid of anything," said Sonia. "May I go now?" She got up. They told Sonia where the barn was, how she should stand silently and listen, and gave her her coat. She threw it over her head and glanced at Nikolai. "What a lovely girl she is," he thought, "and what have I been thinking about all this time?" Sonia went out to the corridor as to go to the barn. Nikolai hastily went to the front porch, saying that he was hot. Indeed, it was stuffy in the house because of the crowd of people. Outside there was some immobile snow, the same moon, only it was still brighter. The light was so strong, and there were so many stars on the snow, that one did not look at the sky, and the real stars went unnoticed. The sky was black and dull. The earth was merry. Fool that I am! What have I been waiting for all this time?" thought Nikolai. And running down from the porch, he went around the corner of the house and along the path that led to the back porch. He knew Sonia would pass that way. Halfway down the path there lay some stacked firewood. It was covered with snow and cast a shadow. The shadows of old, bare linden trees, intertwining, fell across and beside it on the snow in the path. The path led to the barn. The log wall of the barn and the snow-covered roof gleamed in the moonlight as if cut from some precious stone. A tree cracked in the garden, and again everything was perfectly silent. His breast seemed to breathe in, not air, but some eternally young strength and joy. There was a patter of feet on the steps of the servants' porch, a loud creak on the last step where the snowdrift lay, and the old maid's voice said, Straight down the path, miss, only don't look back." "I'm not afraid," Sonia's voice replied, and her little feet, screeching and squeaking in their thin shoes, went down the path towards Nikolai. Sonia walked wrapped in her fur coat. She was 2 steps away before she saw him. She also saw him not as she had known him, and had always been a little afraid of him. He was in a woman's dress with tousled hair and happy smile that was new for Sonia. Sonia quickly ran to him. Quite different and yet the same, thought Nikolai, looking at her face all lit up by the moonlight. He slipped his hands under the coat that covered her head and embraced her, pressed her to him and kissed her on the lips, which had a mustache on them and smelled of burnt cork. Sonia kissed him right in the middle of the lips and, freeing her small hands, put them to his cheeks. "Sonia, Nicholas," was all they said. They ran to the barn and came back, each by a separate porch. Section 12. While they all set out for home from Pelageya Danilovna's, Natasha, who always saw and noticed everything, arranged it so that she and Louisa Ivanovna got in the sleigh with Dimmler, and Sonia got in with Nikolai and the maids. Nikolai, no longer racing, drove smoothly on the way back, and in that strange moonlight kept peering at Sonia, seeking in that ever-changing light behind the eyebrows and mustache the former and the present Sonia, from whom he had now resolved never to be parted. He peered, and when he recognized the same one and the other, and remembered the smell of cork mixed with the feeling of the kiss, he drew in the frosty air, gazing at the earth speeding past and the brilliant sky. He again felt himself in a magical kingdom. "How do you feel, Sonia?" he asked now and then. "Yes," Sonia said. "And you?" "Oh, how do you feel good, Sonia?" he asked now and then. "Yes," she replied. "And you?" In the middle of the way, Nikolai handed the horses over to the coachman, ran to Natasha's sleigh for a moment, and stood on the fender. "Natasha," he whispered to her in French, "you know I've made up my mind about Sonia." "Have you told her?" asked Natasha, suddenly all beaming with joy. "Ah, Natasha, you're so strange with that mustache and those eyebrows. Are you glad?" "I'm so glad. So glad. I was getting angry with you. I didn't tell you, but you have behaved badly towards her. She's such a heart, Nicholas. I'm so glad. I can be nasty, but I was always ashamed to be happy alone without Sonia." Natasha went on. "Now I'm so glad. Well, run to her." "Ah, wait. No, how funny you are," said Nikolai, peering at her and finding in his sister as well something new, unusual, and enchantingly tender, which he had not seen in her before. "Natasha, it's something magical, isn't it?" "Yes," she said. "You've done a wonderful thing." If I had seen her before as she is now, thought Nikolai, I'd have asked her long ago what I should do, and I'd have done whatever she told me, and everything would be right. "So you're glad, and I've done right?" "Oh, so right. I recently quarreled with Mamma about it. Mamma said she was trying to snare you. How could she say that? I nearly had a fight with Mamma, and I'll never let anybody say or think anything bad about her because there's nothing but good in her." "So it's right," said Nikolai, once more searching into the expression of his sister's face to find out if it was true, and his boots creaking, he jumped off the fender and ran to his sleigh. The same happy, smiling Circassian with a little mustache and shining eyes looked from under a sable hood, sat there, and this Circassian was Sonia, and this Sonia was certainly his future happy and loving wife. Having come home and told their mother how they spent the time at the Melyukovs', the girls went to their rooms. They undressed, but without wiping off their cork mustaches, and sat for a long time talking about their happiness. They talked about how they would live when they were married, how their husbands would be friends, and how they would be happy. Mirrors prepared by Dunyushka since evening stood on Natasha's table. "Only, when will it be?" "Never, I'm afraid. It would be too good," said Natasha, getting up and going over the mirrors. "Sit down, Natasha. Maybe you'll see him," said Sonia. Natasha lit the candles and sat down. "I see someone with a mustache," said Natasha, seeing her own face. "Don't laugh, miss," said Dunyasha. With the help of Sonia and the maid, Natasha found the right position for the mirror. Her head acquired a grave expression, and she fell silent. For a long time she sat looking at the row of candles going into the depths of the mirror, supposing, according to stories she had heard, that she would see a coffin, or that she would see him, Prince Andrei, in the last dim, blurry square. But however ready she was to take the smallest spot for the image of a man or a coffin, she saw nothing. She started blinking rapidly and left the mirror. "Why is it others see things and I don't?" she said. "Well, you sit down, Sonia. You must do it tonight," she said. "In my place. I feel so frightened tonight." Sonia sat down before the mirror, got into the right position, and began to look. "Now Sofya Alexandrovna's sure to see something," Dunyasha said in a whisper, "because you just laugh all the time." Sonia heard those words and heard Natasha say in a whisper, "And I know she'll see something. She did last year." For about 3 minutes they were silent. "She's sure to," Natasha whispered, and did not finish. Suddenly Sonia moved away from the mirror she was holding and covered her eyes with her hand. "Ah, Natasha," she said. "Did you see something? Did you? What did you see?" Natasha cried. "I told you so," said Dunyasha, holding up the mirror. Sonia had not seen anything, but she had been just about to blink her eyes and get up when she heard Natasha's voice say, "She's sure to." She did not want to disappoint either Dunyasha or Natasha, and it was hard to go on sitting there. She did not know how or why that cry had escaped her when she covered her eyes with her hand. "Did you see him?" asked Natasha, seizing her hand. "Yes, wait, I saw him," Sonia said involuntarily, still not knowing who Natasha meant by him. Him Nikolai or him Andrei? "But why shouldn't I say I saw him? Other people see things, and who can catch me out whether I did or didn't see anything?" flashed in Sonia's head. "Yes, I saw him," she said. How? Standing up or lying down?" "No, I saw. First there was nothing, then I suddenly saw him lying down." "Andrei lying down? Is he sick?" Natasha asked, looking at her friend fearfully fixed eyes. "No, quite the opposite. He had a cheerful face. He turned to me." And the moment she said it, she thought she had seen what she said. "And then, Sonia?" "Then I didn't quite see. There was something blue and red." "Sonia, when will he come back? When will I see him? My God, how I fear for him and for myself, and I'm frightened about everything," Natasha said, and without a word of replying to Sonia's consolation, she went to bed, and long after the candle was put out, lay motionless, open-eyed on her bed, looking at the frosty moonlight through the windows. Section 13. Soon after Christmas time, Nikolai told his mother about his love for Sonia and his firm decision to marry her. The Countess, who had long noticed what was happening between Sonia and Nikolai, and had been expecting this talk, listened silently to his words and said to her son that he could marry whomever he wanted, but that neither she nor his father would give their blessing to such a marriage. For the first time, Nikolai felt that his mother was displeased with him, and that, despite all her love for him, she would not yield. Coldly and without looking at her son, she sent for her husband, and when he came, the Countess was going to tell him, briefly and coldly, in Nikolai's presence, what the matter was, but she could not stand it. She wept tears of vexation and left the room. The old Count began hesitantly to admonish Nikolai and beg him to renounce his intention. Nikolai replied that he could not go back on his word, and his father sighed, and obviously embarrassed, very quickly broke off their talk and went to the Countess. In all his confrontations with his son, the Count had always been aware of his guilt before him for the disorder of his affairs, and therefore he could not be angry with his son for his refusal to marry a rich bride and his choice of the dowerless Sonia. He only remembered once vividly that if their affairs had not been in disorder, they could not have hoped for a better wife for Nikolai than Sonia, and that he alone, with his Mitenka and his insupportable habits, was to blame for the disorder of their affairs. The father and the mother spoke no further with their son about this matter, but several days later the Countess summoned Sonia to her, and with a cruelty neither of them expected, reproached her niece for luring her son away and for ingratitude. Sonia listened to the Countess's cruel words silently, with lowered eyes, and did not understand what was being demanded of her. She was ready to sacrifice everything for her benefactors. The thought of self-sacrifice was her favorite thought, but in this case she did not understand to whom and what she must sacrifice. She could not help loving the Countess and the whole Rostov family, but neither could she help loving Nikolai, and knowing that his happiness depended on that love. She was silent and sad and made no reply. Nikolai, as it seemed to him, could not bear this situation any longer and went to talk with his mother. Nikolai first begged his mother to forgive him and Sonia and agree to their marriage, then threatened his mother that if Sonia was persecuted, he would secretly marry her at once. The Countess, with a coldness such as her son had never seen, replied to him that he was of age, that Prince Andrei was going to marry without his father's consent, and that he could do the same, but that she would never recognize this intriguer as her daughter. At the word intriguer, Nikolai exploded, raised his voice, said to his mother that he had never thought she would make him sell his feelings, and that if it was so, he was saying for the last time. But he had no time to say the decisive word, which, judging by the expression on her face, his mother anticipated with horror, which might have remained a bitter memory between them forever. He had no time to finish because Natasha, with a pale and serious face, came into the room from the door behind which she had been eavesdropping. "Nikolenka, you're talking nonsense. Keep quiet. Keep quiet. Keep quiet, I tell you." She almost shouted in order to drown out his voice. "Mama, darling, it's not at all because of my poor dear heart," she was saying to her mother, who was feeling herself on the verge of a breakup, looking at her son with horror, but being stubborn and carried away by the struggle. would not and could not give in. Nikolenka, I'll explain. You just go. Listen, Mama darling, she said to her mother. Her words were meaningless, but they achieved the result she was striving for. The Countess, sobbing heavily, hid her face on her daughter's breast, and Nikolai got up, clutched his head, and left the room. Natasha took up the cause of reconciliation, and brought it to a point where Nikolai obtained his mother's promise that Sonia would not be oppressed, and promised him that he would not undertake anything, and promised himself that he would not undertake anything in secret from his parents. With the firm intention of settling matters in his affairs in the regiment, resigning from the service, coming home and marrying Sonia, Nikolai, with sad and serious, in discord with his family, but as it seemed to him, passionately in love, left for his regiment at the beginning of January. After Nikolai's departure, the Rostov house became sadder than ever. The Countess was so emotionally upset that she fell ill. Sonia grieved both at being parted from Nikolai and still more at the hostile tone with which the Countess could not help treating her. The Count was more preoccupied than ever with the bad state of his affairs, which called for some decisive measures. It was necessary to sell the Moscow house and nearby estate, and to sell the house it was necessary to go to Moscow. But because of the Countess's health, they had to put off the departure from day to day. Natasha, who had borne the initial time of her separation from her fiancé lightly and even cheerfully, now grew more and more troubled and impatient with every day. The thought that her best time, which she could have used in loving him, was being wasted like that, for nothing, tormented her unremittingly. His letters mostly made her angry. It offended her to think that while she lived only by thoughts of him, he was living a real life, seeing new places and new people who interested him. The more diverting his letters were, the more vexed she felt. Her own letters to him not only did not furnish her with any comfort, but were a boring and false duty. She was unable to write because she could not conceive the possibility of truthfully expressing in a letter even 100th part of what she was used to expressing with her voice, smile, and gaze. She wrote him classically monotonous, dry letters to which she herself did not ascribe any significance, and in the drafts of which the Countess corrected the spelling errors. The Countess's health did not improve, but it was no longer possible to put off the Moscow trip. A dowry had to be prepared. The house had to be sold, and besides, Prince Andrei was first expected in Moscow, where Prince Nikolai Andreich was spending that winter. Natasha was sure that he had already arrived. The Countess stayed in the country, and the Count, taking Sonia and Natasha with him, went to Moscow at the end of January. And that is the end of section 13. It's also the end of part 4 of volume 2. And so even though it's kind of short, I'm going to go ahead and end it there for today, just so that we can start part 5 of volume 2 fresh tomorrow. I kind of hate to break up the rhythm of Tolstoy, because he usually puts the breaks in nice places. So sorry that's a little shorter today. I could have maybe planned that a little bit better if I looked ahead, but sometimes that's just how it is, and that's all right. We'll try to read a little extra into part 5 tomorrow. I don't know how to feel about the Sonia Nikolai thing. I mean, Sonia is great, and she will probably be the best wife for him. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm happy for them, but it is causing quite a fracas among the family. But I mean, the Count's kind of impression of it is right. If his management was a little better, I'm sure things wouldn't be in such a state, and they wouldn't mind. It wouldn't be a problem with his marrying Sonia. I guess I just don't trust Nikolai Rostov enough with Sonia. I mean, the fact she's lovely and she's has seemed to have a very giving heart, but he seems like a nice young man. He's just so impetuous that I'm not sure. I wonder if things were financially bad for them as a young couple, if he would still be, as in love with her, I guess. And I'm kind of hoping Natasha is, that Prince Andrei will come back, so Natasha doesn't have to be so tormented. It's really hard being that long away from someone you care about. So I hope it doesn't affect her affection for him. But I think we'll hear more about that tomorrow. So anyways, always check out the links I put at the end of the video. I don't think I've added any new recently, but you can always check it out. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.